Welcome back. After what we hope was a fruitful reflection time, we encourage you to continue your individual reflection or group discussion beyond this time as you process what you've heard and learned throughout the virtual teaching. During our next session, we will welcome Pedro Guerrero from the campus of Loyola University Chicago. Pedro is a native of Lima, Peru. His family and he immigrated to the United States in the early 1990s in the wake of an ongoing internal conflict in his home country. After earning his bachelor's degree in political science from Loyola University Chicago, Pedro moved to Rome, Italy to work as a graduate assistant in Loyola's John Felice Rome Center program. There he coordinated campus ministry events and established their international volunteering program, where he took students to Poland to engage in a human rights symposium and Malta for an immersive experience of the refugee influx in Western Europe. Upon moving back to the United States, Pedro went on to work as the only green card holding immigrant in the Missouri legislature, holding the position of legislative assistant for a member of the House of Representatives. He recently moved back to the Chicago area to serve as an assistant director of alumni relations for Loyola University Chicago, where he organizes ministry and service opportunities for alumni, among other things. Pedro also was sworn in as a citizen of the United States in October 2018. Let's welcome Pedro.
Hello, Ignatian family. My name is Pedro Guerrero, and I'm a proud graduate of Loyola University Chicago. Greetings from the Windy City. Last summer, I spent a week volunteering at a family detention center in Dilley, Texas, providing translation services for women and children seeking asylum here in the United States. You'll recall that last summer was a particularly turbulent time for our immigration policies, as this administration was putting into place strict family separation policies that were tearing apart mothers and children as they entered the United States in search of a better, safer life. I'd like to share with you some stories of the women and children that I encountered while spending this time at the family detention center. Before I go into these stories, I think it might be useful to offer you all a background on the current state of our asylum policies. If you are a non-citizen and present yourself at a border or an entryway, in this case the southern border, or you're encountered by authorities after you've crossed, you are detained and then subject to expedited removal proceedings. However, upon declaring that you'd like to claim asylum here in the United States, you are then subject to prove that you have a credible or reasonable fear that prevents you from returning to your home country. All this to say that you have to prove to someone, an asylum officer, that you will either be tortured or killed based on a certain set of criteria set forth by the U.S. government. If you get the green light from the asylum officer, you then have to go through a years-long process that may or may not offer you a path to citizenship. The stories of these women can be pretty hard to swallow. Please be forewarned that some details may be triggering to some victims of sexual or domestic abuse. Probably the most difficult case that my friend Mark and I worked on was that of a woman in her late 20s, early 30s. She came to the United States after being extorted in her home country. She also became subject to threats against the life of her younger daughter, and she knew to take these threats seriously after seeing other mothers approached in her community being extorted, and when they were unable to pay, their children were killed in cold blood in front of them. Oftentimes, intimidation tactics like this and public massacres were used to impose power in these poor communities. And this was a common theme that we found among the women that we interviewed that came from many different countries in Central America. However, this particular client had an even bigger hurdle to pass. And as a younger woman, she came to Mexico on vacation in a particularly turbulent time where mass kidnappings and drug cartels were a common occurrence. And she was kidnapped for several months. However, after a few months, she was able to escape and described to us her running as fast as she can, coming to a river, crossing the river, and continuing to run. She had entered the United States and didn't even know it until she was apprehended by a federal official. She was later deported and then barred from entering the country for 10 years. However, this particular instance of bad luck would make her case even more difficult to tackle because people that have been previously deported automatically have a higher threshold to prove when seeking asylum. However, today I'm happy to say that our client was released from the family detention center with her younger daughter. And I'm not quite sure where she's at in the process, but I know that she's in a better, safer place with family members here in the United States. In these cases where there are such high volumes of people in these overwhelming situations, it's pretty easy to feel hopeless. In the week that I was volunteering at the detention center, I found myself really questioning if I was making a profound difference. The services that we provided to these women and children were truly invaluable. One can compare these experiences to walking on a fresh bed of snow. When walking on the snow, you can't really see the tracks that you're leaving without turning around and looking. Today, I am reminded of the profound difference that my friend and I made in the lives of our 6 clients and their children, knowing that we've instilled hope and safety for them. And with these experiences, I can advocate on their behalf and I can tell their stories. Thank you, Ignatian Family, AMDG. Obviously, this was a very abridged version of my experience in Dilley, Texas. But if you have any more questions or would like to learn about the organization that I worked with, or if you yourself would like to travel down to these family detention centers and offer translation or legal services, feel free to contact me over social media that I have included at the end. Thank you and have a great day.
Thank you, Pedro. We now head back to the U.S.-Mexico border to speak with Father Pete Neeley, Associate Director of Education for Kino Border Initiative. Father Neeley is a native of San Francisco, California. He holds degrees from Gonzaga University, St. Louis University, and Loyola University Chicago. He taught theology at the University of San Francisco, where he directed the Office of Hispanic Ministry and Campus Ministry. Since 1975, Father Neeley has studied and worked in Mexico and Central America. During the 1980s, he led human rights delegations on numerous occasions, both in El Salvador and Nicaragua. In 1986, he spent a year in El Salvador studying the effects of fundamentalism on the Catholic and Protestant Christian community. From 1987 to 91, he taught in the summer programs for the Jesuit University in Guadalajara, Mexico. And from 1991 to 98, he was involved in full-time pastoral work in East Los Angeles and Hollywood. His primary emphasis there was with Latino youth at risk, as well as immigrant families. This includes celebrating the sacraments in juvenile halls and local county facilities. From 1998 to 2006, he worked for Jesuit Refugee Service and the Los Angeles Detention Project as the Director of Religious Services in Southern California. From 2008 until today, he has been involved with the Kino Border Initiative in Nogales, Arizona, and Nogales, Sonora, Mexico, as the Assistant Director of Educational Programs. And now we welcome Father Neeley.
Journeying together, I think, as a theme fits into what we do here. The journeys on the border, the pilgrimages on the border, the journeys that the migrants that we assist and serve here in the Kino Border Initiative are basically on a journey. We call them the pilgrims of the desert. That's one of the terms. Instead of using migrants, that can be kind of a derogatory term for many, we just call them the travelers. And these are traveling north. And we see that both from Central America and people from Mexico. We also deal with people who have been in the States for years and are being deported back. So it's a different type of journey. But the way in which we talk about the journey is using the term called accompaniment. We walk with them. And when you accompany somebody, that doesn't necessarily mean you have to lead them. You have to, show them the way, or you have to even walk behind them. You walk beside them. All the groups that come down here, the most important thing that we offer in Kino Border Initiative is an opportunity to listen to the stories of each individual and the variety of stories that they're going to hear, and the stories that come from the raw experience. These are unfiltered stories of an individual, maybe recently deported, as this morning, and you're having breakfast with them, or people who have been traveling for months from Central America to get here. But they're all going to share their story. Why are you here? And you are not to, you're not to even be in dialogue with them. You're not talking with them. You're listening and being able to listen. It's frustrating. Yeah, we agree. Many people want to come down and fix it, and they can't fix it. They want to tell them, this is what we should do. We should we not? That's kind of very American. But we have to just hold our tongues and listen. And we offer that. We offer you a space, a safe place, where they feel safe with you. Many times the comments I'll hear after one of the travelers, one of the migrants in our shelter will share with the students, they'll say, "Father, I didn't think anybody cared. Nobody when I go home is going to listen to my story. Thank you for listening to my story." And the stories are, again, stories that I find God works through these stories. These are very biblical stories, the biblical stories of Exodus, the biblical stories of the apostles, the frustrations, the sense of being lost on the journey, but not a sense of ever losing God. And so when students come down here, even skeptical, could be, agnostics, they listen to these stories and say, you're not going to debate one of these people, one of these recent migrants who have been out wandering in the desert, for example, that there's no God. They are so firmly believe the reason why they're in our center in the morning is because God was with them the whole time they were in the desert. He did not abandon them. So these are, faith-filled stories. There are also stories of being overcoming a lot of the adversity. Then stories of one of my favorites is one of the first ones we had here, of a woman named Isabel. 10 years ago, she was wandering in the desert. She got picked up by Border Patrol, but only after she couldn't walk any further. And the group left her behind, and they know that. That's one of the things you sign up for. You can't keep up, you're going to be left behind. And so she was just left behind. She said, "I can't keep up anymore." Well, part of the reason is she was 8 months pregnant. And I know people listening to me saying, "Father, what kind of woman would do that? 8 months pregnant and risk the life, her life and the life of her child to do that." And yeah, that's a good question. And especially if you're a woman who's been 8 months pregnant, you don't want to be walking in the desert here. Even though it was November, which is one of the nicer months to walk in, but it's still, it's a dangerous journey. And I said, the answer is, this is a desperate woman. And desperation as an emotion, it's not something that very many American students that I've dealt with, high school or college, have any experience of desperation. Desperation shuts off the logical thinking, shuts off the options. I have no option. She was facing certain death if she stayed where she was. But even worse than death for her was the fact that they threatened to kill her baby if she had the baby, because the father of the baby didn't want to have anything to do with it. So she didn't see any other option. Her story also takes on another twist for me, because she was with a group of about 20 people, she said. A 16-year-old boy was with her, she said, because she said he was not much older than my son, my first son. And this kid left with everybody, but got to the road, and whatever God inspired him to stay there. He let everybody else go. The rest of the group went up, and he said, "I'm going to stay for the Border Patrol." He got picked up by the Border Patrol, and he took them back to where the woman was. Of course, he lost his chance to get to the United States. He's lost his chance for his freedom. He gave it up to save this woman's life and the life of her child. We don't know who he is. There's no way I can contact this kid. And it's really one of those stories where I say, lay down your life for your brother. This kid basically did it. All his dreams, all his future, he was there. He made it. He was crossing the road. And once you cross this road out in the desert, you're pretty much on your way to Tucson or Phoenix. And yet he gave that up to go back and save this woman's life. She got picked up. She got aerovac. She couldn't even move. So they helicoptered her into the hospital in Tucson. Even the border agent who was guarding her room, because she was illegal alien in those days, that was the term they would use. And she said, the guard that was guarding her said, "Lady, you have this baby, you can at least stay here 9 months, and you got some time to, get your, act together, and, so push harder." And she said, I couldn't do it. Of course, she's totally traumatized. She's not even a clue of what's happening to her. So they could deported her. The Mexican government wouldn't. She couldn't go back to where she was going. They didn't have another place to go. So we ended up taking her in. And the sisters, the nuns that work with us, that was our first real woman in our shelter. She had her baby on the 24th of December, and she named him Emmanuel. Very appropriate name for this kid. The long story short, that kid should be 10 years old, and I'd love to find out whatever happened to him. She ended up finding another woman in the shelter who lived on the other side of Mexico, on the Gulf Coast, and ended up going home with her, a completely different part of the country. Nobody could find her, and we don't know whatever happened to her. But those are the kind of stories, that make this job really worthwhile. The gratification that you have of seeing new life come out of almost a certain death. And then we hear these over and over from guys from different situations. More common ones you'll hear today are the things that you will be challenged with as an American citizen coming down and doing this work, is how do we justify a person who's 25 years in the United States, been here since he was 5 years old, he has a clean record, he's got a house, a wife and kids, and they're U.S. citizens, and he gets deported. What's wrong with that picture? And listen to the guy down there saying, well, what am I going to do? Where do I go from here? The desperation of saying, if I go back, I can get put into jail now. We've changed the law so drastically that it becomes a felony. If you re-enter after being, deported, you can go to, federal penitentiary, not to a detention center, not to a county facility, but a real, federal pen, like murderers or rapists, whatever you want to call them. They're putting that in that same category. That's a real issue that we have to face. And these guys, that's the reality. They have to face that. But at the same time, what am I going to do with my family? We get, the things, I guess, that really affect me is the ones that are the kids that get trafficked north. Parents who are so desperate, they'll send their 5-year-old son. Now, the dad lives in New York City. The mom lives in Mexico City. She sends the guy, their son, up here to ship to his dad, saying, oh, it's easier for the kid to get across than me. The kid's going to get a better education. He'll be safe in the States. So I'm going to ship him off to my... And she puts him in the hands of a trafficker, basically. They call them coyotes, but I don't like to use the term coyote. Most of us who work down here don't use those terms anymore because they tend to be more romantic, dehumanized terms. Let's call it what it is. These people are trafficking, trading in their ability to take people across the border illegally. So this guy said to this kid, and I'm there in the Commodore, in our soup kitchen there, and he says, oh, Father, I'm so excited. I'm going to see my dad tomorrow. I haven't seen him since I was 2 years old. And I'm really good, because the guy promised me we're going to cross the border tonight. We're going to go across downtown. And this kid was just all excited about it. And I just said, there's something wrong with this picture. You can't be, you can't, as a citizen, get across the border here and get to New York in 24 hours. By the time you especially taking a bus, it's going to take a couple of days. That's just the logistics of it. But this kid was so excited by it. The next day, he's back on the Commodore. And he was just catatonic. He looked at me and recognized me, and he was almost embarrassed, ashamed. And so, just come over, you just give him a good hug and say, it's going to be okay. Let's see what else, what other options. We'll talk to your dad. We'll make a connection here and see what we can do. And, those are the kind of things that really, there's no reason that kid needs to suffer because of this. Why can't we have some structures that would allow that kid to visit his dad? And without having his dad leave his job and leave the only means of support to come down and visit him here. This is where, it is complicated. And there is no just instant answer to it. But we need to face those questions. We need to immerse ourselves in this complication and not shy away from it. I think I've been criticized for making it too complicated. And for a high school student, you can't, if it gets too complicated, you get basically frozen in inertia because it's just overpowering. But I think there are things that we can do, and there's a number of things that I would like to see students, the groups that come down here, very concrete things. Not to lose hope. You can't lose hope. That's absolutely essential in this work. I've been doing this work for 20 years. And they say, well, how can you never win anything, And I said, yeah, well, Jesus never won anything either, let's be realistic. Dying on a cross, most people, that's all they ever saw. That's a big time loser, all right? All the people that hung around with him left him, So, you can't be judging your goals by how many you win. But there are things that I want to say, real positive things that advocacy does work on. And the immigration stuff, in my own experiences, locally, we've got the Border Patrol and Customs to stop deporting people after 11 o'clock at night and before 6 in the morning. where they used to just drop women and children right on the border. They just drop them here downtown at 2 in the morning whenever they felt like it. Well, we got them to stop doing that because people started calling Washington, D.C. We started making inroads with the local people here. I mean, Border Patrol and Customs, they're not the enemy. We're not fighting against. I mean, they go to Mass, the same place I say Mass on Sunday. You know, they go to communion with the same, faith. So we want to make sure that we don't paint that as an us-them type of thing. We need to work together on this. The other thing is really, 15 years ago, the U.S. government, the immigration, would drop off minors under 18 years old at the border in Tijuana and Matamoros and Juarez, here in Nogales. They drop them off with no sponsorship, with nobody, left them on the street. So a 15-year-old girl being dropped off in Tijuana, any time of the day, is going to be picked up by some traffickers right there. They have no place to stay there. So we got the government to stop doing that. A coalition of human rights groups in Washington, D.C. worked with the Homeland Security and with congressmen and senators to stop doing that. It's a small thing, yes, but it's a big thing for those people. Big thing for kids not being deported. One of the things we work on now is the whole thing of check cashing. Real simple thing. If everybody who's at this teach-in today was to take out their phone and just put in their congressman's, person's address there and say, what about the U.S. government taking the money from migrants and by giving them checks that they can't cash? Can somebody look into that for us? And I just think that if we do that, 20 people in Ohio writing to their congressman saying, hey, what about this check cashing thing where you're giving checks that are no good, basically, in Mexico? Why do we have to do that? Can't we come up with a better way? And so somebody in that office, in that senator, that congressperson's office, is going to say, what is this about check cashing? Where is that coming? But it's a real concrete thing. And you say, well, yeah, but it's only $50. Well, that's the only $50 that person has. That's everything. So I want to encourage folks to really, use that power that we have, because it can make a difference. And we can get this on the radar. Our program is based on the personal connection. Paraphrasing Pope Francis and saying, immigration refugee work in Europe is never going to be solved until every European knows a refugee. And it's basically the theme of the Kino Border Initiative and our program down here with migrants is you come down. You are coming down because you have a good heart, because you really want to do what is right, and you're going to come down and you're going to sit down and have a conversation, listen to this story, get to know Jose, Maria, Juan, and know their story, know where they're coming from. You're going to accompany them. And then you're going to go back and you're going to deal with your issues in your place, your local area. And that's where it starts. So in your high school, you can do something. In your university, you can do it. In your parish, you can do something. You're not totally, but it's not such a big thing that we can't, attack it from all these different sides. And I know it works because, go back to my generation in El Salvador. We were able to bring around those changes. Not because I stayed in El Salvador and I worked in El Salvador. I was very happy there. But they themselves, the Jesuits I lived with, said, if you want to change anything in El Salvador, go back to the United States. Work in the United States. So I'm telling you, if you're listening to this, if you want to change stuff in our immigration, we've got to do it from here. It's not going to happen outside of us. And I think we're in a good place to do that now because we do have the names, the faces, the stories. These are real live people whose real lives are being affected by this. And we need to, see that accompaniment, that solidarity with them, that we're one with them, that there are our brothers and sisters, that they belong to the same family, they have the same concerns as we do. And we need to have a human answer to this question. That's a very political and ideological question at this point.
Thank you, Father Neeley, for sharing your insights and stories from your work on the U.S.-Mexico border and with the Kino Border Initiative. We will now break for our second reflection period. Again, reflection questions for groups and individuals can be downloaded at the virtual teach-in website, igsolnet/virtual. That's igsol.net/virtual.